Chapter 2 of Plow Stories by Clara D. Pierson. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 2 The First Plow. Ever since the boy could remember, his father and mother had lived near the banks of the great river. He and his brothers and sisters had to work almost all the time, after they were old enough to do anything, but they did not mind this very much, because all children had to work every day, except when there was some great festival, when work stopped. They did not go to school, because there were no schools for them. They did not rest on Sunday, because there was no Sunday then. This was thousands of years ago, even before Moses had received the 10 Commandments on Mount Sinai and learned about the day of rest. The boy had never heard that women and girls had souls. He thought that it was pleasant to have them around his home, because they ground the grain in hand mills and made it into cakes to cook over their little fires. Then the men and the boys ate of these cakes and of the meat which the women and girls boiled or roasted for them. Afterward, the women and girls were allowed to eat what was left, and there was almost always some left. The boys' sisters helped their mother find fuel for the fire. Sometimes they gathered bundles of wood from the forests, and sometimes they brought in straw and other fuel, bits of which they found here and there along the roads, where the oxen and camels and the donkeys passed with their burdens. They never had a fire to warm themselves by, for they did not need one. Their home was in Egypt, so warm a country that fires were needed only for cooking. Sometimes the boy had to gather fuel too, but that was only when there were not enough girls to do it. Most of the time he helped his father in the fields, for his father is one of the fellahin, or farmers, and farmers could work almost the whole year in Egypt, where they could raise as many as 3 crops on their land, if they could have water enough. Heavy rains fell in the fall and early winter, when the land was carefully hoed and the seed sown. The only snow that the boy had ever seen was that which whitened the tops of the mountains. He had neither touched it nor had a chance to look at its beautiful 6-sided crystals. In the summer there came a time when no rain fell, and when it was too hot to work all day in the fields. Then people stayed in the shade and did more quiet tasks. Now the boy was called upon to help his father get the hoes ready for putting in their grain crop. These hoes were called sarcles, and were made of 2 pieces of wood, one of which was straight and used as a handle, and the other was curved and sharp. The 2 were tied together at their upper tips with thongs, strips of leather, and there was also a second thong connecting them part way down, so that when the sharp end of the sarcle struck the ground, the 2 pieces of wood would be less likely to be wrenched apart by the blow. Sarcles did not wear very long, because there was no metal on them, so the fellahin got several ready before the time came to use them. The man, the boy's father, had a pile of heavy sticks, both straight and curved, stacked beside him under a tree, and was cutting thongs of ox hide. "Come to me, boy," he cried, "and I will show you how to make sarcles. You are my eldest son, and old enough to use one. Now you must learn to make one." So the boy seated himself on the ground near the man and picked 2 sticks from the pile, one straight and one curved. "Who taught you to make a sarcle, my father?" said he. "Who should teach me but my father?" answered the man. "That is the way in which all knowledge is spread. Fathers teach their sons, and when their sons are old, they teach their sons the same thing." "And do they never forget?" asked the boy. "Why should they forget?" said the man. "There are not many things to think about. Why should people forget any of them? One must know how to build a mud house, how to keep water, how to make sarcles, and how to harvest his crops. Also, one must know when to go to the temple, but the priests tell one that. Surely one can remember those things." The boy was silent for a while, watching his father sharpen a crooked stick with a rude knife, which he had made from a stone. At last he spoke again. "Do women teach their daughters in the same way?" he asked. The man grunted crossly. "Why talk about women?" he said. "They know less than cattle. They know little but how to grind the grain and make the cakes and cook the meat. We have them around to make life easy and pleasant for us, but they know very little." The woman, who was making flour for the family, sighed when she heard her husband say this. Of course, she thought, the priests and the men must be right. Still, there are days when I'm not too tired, and when the weather is not too hot, and the people are not too cross, when it really seems to me that I know a good deal. Then she went on with her grinding, for she had to grind many hours each day in order to make flour enough for that day's meals. Her daughters were not yet old enough to turn the heavy upper stone, although they could gather fuel and tend the sheep. Also, they could gather the wild fruits which grew on the plains and the hillsides around about. Hundreds of years before, when their great-great-great-great-grandparents lived in Asia, the women and girls did all the work in the fields as well as in the home. That was because the men had to spend all their time in hunting and fighting. Again the boy asked a question. "Tell me, O my father," he said, "is there ever anything new for a man to teach to his sons?" "Never," answered the man. "How could there be? Do we not already understand how to build houses, store water, make circles, and harvest crops? To be sure, there are a few other things, like caring for the animals that bear our burdens on their backs, but all these necessary things we know. What else is there to learn?" The boy was silent again, for he could not answer that question, not knowing what there was that he did not know. Still, he felt that there might be something more after all, and he found his mother looking at him quite as though she thought so too. He decided then that he would talk it over with her, at some time when the man was not around. Now the man passed the knife to him, and showed him how to cut thongs for his own sarcle. It was a heavy knife, and looked as though it would last a long time, perhaps even longer than the man would live. It cost a great deal of work to make a knife in those days, and people who had knives never left them lying around, either out of doors or in. All morning the boy wrought beside the man, and again all afternoon, and when the sun was sinking low in the west, and they ate their meat and dough cakes with fruit from the mountainside, which the women had dried in the hot summer sun, they had a pile of neatly made sarcles ready for use. Then the man and the boy's younger brothers, sat on the ground and ate and were happy, for the man was a hard worker and the woman was a good and busy one. And none of the fellaheen had a better hut, nor more food for his children, the fine-looking boys who had minds and souls, and the equally fine-looking girls who were said to have neither. Early the next morning the man and the boy began to work with the newly made sarcles. The soil was rich with the richness which their great river, the Nile, had been bringing to the land from the middle of Africa for hundreds of years. Whenever the Nile became swollen with rains, it overflowed its banks and spread this richness over the level plains on either side. When the water went down, this richness, or alluvium, as we call such water-borne richness, remained on the plains, and that is why all Egypt was sometimes called the gift of the Nile. Such rich soil did not need to be deeply stirred and turned over before the seed was sown. Indeed, neither the man nor his friends, nor his father, nor his father's friends, had ever heard of stirring the soil before planting their grain. Sometimes they even sowed their seed before all the water had sunk into the ground. Sometimes they spoke of doing this as casting their bread upon the waters. They knew that it was not wasting their bread grain, for it would come back to them after many days, in the shape of much more grain than they had sown. The man had not sown his grain early this year, for there were more fowls of the air around than usual, ready to devour it. First of all, he and the boy scattered the grain over as much land as they expected to work that day. They carried the grain in vessels made of clay and flung it broadcast with swinging motion of the right hand, and one handful at a time. When they had done this, they went back and forth across the field with sarcles hoeing the soil. This stirred the soil in such a way that part of the grain was covered, and the rest of it fell into little crevices, where the moist earth surrounded it, and the rootlets would find strength-giving food ready for them on all sides when they appeared. It was hard work, this bending almost double all day, and raising and lowering the clumsy wooden sarcles. They had to grasp them well out of the handles with their left hands and hold them far enough away from their bodies to make sure that the sharpened points did not strike their bare feet on the downward stroke. When night came, they were glad to rest under the trees after eating the good meal which the women had ready for them. Then, the work of the day being done, the children played around. Some of them took up the earth-stained sarcles and pretended that they were fellaheen. The girl and her sister next younger both wanted to use the boy's sarcle, and at last they fell to quarreling about it. The younger sister had it, and the girl tried to get it away, seizing the end of the handle and dragging it towards her. The younger sister hung on to the part where the ends of the two sticks were lashed together, but the girl was the stronger of the two and dragged both the sarcle and her little sister towards her, the sarcle point catching in the soft soil as she did so. The woman looked up when she heard the noise and came towards them to stop the quarrel, as mothers have done since the world began. She saw the sarcle point catching in the soil and loosening it, and instead of slapping her children, as she had meant to do, she laughed and said, "That is a new way to use a sarcle. You stir the ground by dragging it instead of by chopping with it, but it would cover the seed exactly as well, and you do not have to keep lifting it." Each of the children cried, "Make her let go." The woman shook her head. "No, this is a good new way to use a sarcle," she said. "Why not play this way? I have always thought that it would be fun to do something really new." Her children looked at her in surprise. They had never heard their mother speak in this way. It sounded as though she actually cared to do something besides the same old tasks day after day, which shows that they also had a new idea. The woman spoke again. "Let me take the sarcle," she said. "I will give it back to you." She turned it about in her strong, work-hardened hands, setting it up with its point in the soil, tilting it this way and tilting it that. And then she said, "Bring me 2 sticks from the fuel pile, and I will make you a play sarcle that will be lighter and better for you than this, one with which 2 can play at once." Now the girl and her sister did not want the real sarcle back. They wanted the one which their mother was to make for them, and they fetched it gladly when she called for a straight stick, which should be longer than the one that they had first brought. The woman put the sticks together, first this way, then that, and when she had them as she wanted them, she tied them together. She did not fasten them by 2 tips, as sarcles were usually fastened. Instead, she tied the end of a long, straight stick to the middle of the curved one. "Now," she said, when she had it quite secure, "the girl shall drag this with her hands behind her back, and her little sister shall hold the upper end of the curved stick and guide it." This pleased her children, and they began to play happily again. The woman stood watching them. "How strong the girl is," she said to herself. "She is like a young ox." The man heard her and suddenly sat straight, looking intently at the new tool. He said nothing, but he looked and looked and looked until it grew dark, and they all lay down to sleep. In the morning the man arose, while as yet it was hardly light, and he took a pole, which he had already shaped for something else, and hooked it to 2 sarcles, thrusting the end of it between them at a point which was halfway from their sharp to their blunt ends, and made it quite secure. By the time he had done this, the woman was up and preparing breakfast, but when she had it ready, he was busy with his oxen. These steady, patient beasts had bore great burdens on their backs, and were used at harvest time to tread out the grain from the sheaves which lay on the ground, but they had never drawn anything after them. Now the man felt of their horns and said, "These are good pegs to tie to." When he had eaten, the man again busied himself with his oxen. He cut notches in the free end of his long straight pole, and he lashed a cross piece to it. Then he lashed the cross-piece to the horns of the oxen, and then the woman and the boy and the girl and the younger children watched him as he worked. But the woman was grinding at the stone mill, which was on the ground by the door of the hut, while she watched. She knew that it took many times as long to grind the grain as it did to eat it, and that she had no time to spare. When he had finished tying the wooden cross-piece to the horns of the oxen, the man called the boy and the girl to him. "Walk on either side of the oxen," he said, "while I try and make them drag these sarcles through the ground. Carry whips or gourds in your hands to prevent their turning when I do not wish them to, and I will carry one to make them go ahead. I am tired of lifting and lowering a sarcle all day during the seeding time. I will try this way." Thus far no oxen had ever dragged a weight behind them, for it was before the days of carts, even before the days when men put rollers under blocks of stone and forced beasts to drag them. Of course the oxen did not understand what was expected of them, but they could not go sideways, and they could not go backwards, and they had no wings for flying, so when they found that they were beaten for standing still, they decided that they must walk ahead, and they did so. The boy liked this better than swinging his sarcle, and the girl enjoyed it more than carrying firewood, and the man was very proud of the success of his plan. In spite of the bewilderment of the oxen, all were quite contented and pleased. The other children followed along to watch them, and the woman kept on grinding at the mill. Soon other fellaheen saw that something unusual was happening. They dropped their sarcles in the fields, and they came over to where the man was forcing his oxen to stir the soil for him. It is true that the sarcles which they dragged made long furrows, instead of simply chopping the soil into loose little lumps, but the grain which had been sown dropped into the furrows and the little crevices quite as it should, so that it was all right. It would lie there and sprout quite as well as if the ground had been chopped apart to make places for it and to cover it. The fellaheen began to talk loudly and excitedly, and as they talked, they gestured with their hands. "Look at those oxen," cried one. "Who would ever have thought that they could be taught to drag things?" "See how the man has fastened that pole to their horns," cried another. "Who would have ever thought of doing that?" "I thought of it," said the man, and he stood very tall and swelled out his chest as he spoke. "Why should one not use their horns, since they have them?" "See how long a straight pole he used in place of the shorter sarcle handle," cried another. "How did he ever come to think of doing that?" "It had to be long, of course," said the man, "in order to reach their horns." "Why couldn't he tie the sarcles to their tails?" asked another. "Then he would not have to use so long a pole." "Yeah!" exclaimed another fellow, or farmer. "If you tied their tails in that way, how could they switch away flies?" "Pooh!" exclaimed another. "If you tied it to their tails, they might turn their heads in two quite different directions, and then where would your sarcles go?" The man was more and more pleased with himself as he heard the loud remarks of his neighbors, but he made his oxen and his children keep at work. "To think of using two sarcles at once!" exclaimed another fellow. "I wonder how he came to do that." "Don't you see that it gave him a better fastening for his pole?" said another, and he spoke quite scornfully, for he found it very easy to see the sense of a thing which had already been done, even though he could never have thought of doing it. Then 2 or 3 fellaheen spoke together. "The great thing," they said, "is the idea of turning the sarcles around, so that they point forward instead of backward. How did he ever think of that?" The man stopped his oxen beside the fellaheen who had just spoken. "It was all very simple," he said, speaking quite as though the invention of the new implement were an everyday affair for him. For some time I have been thinking that there should be an easier way of stirring the soil in seed time. Besides, it is silly that fellaheen should work all the time while their oxen stand idle so much. Since a man can think, why should he not?" The man spoke to his oxen and was starting on, but he stopped them again and spoke to his neighbors once more. His manner was very haughty now. "When you speak of my new tool," he said, "do not call it a sarcle or a pair of sarcles. I have made a new name for it. It is a plow. I shall now go on with my plowing." The fellaheen all murmured admiringly and turned away to take up their sarcles in their own fields. The girl looked at the woman, and the boy looked at the girl. But the woman, who had heard all that was said, kept on grinding at the mill. "Now," she was thinking, "I know that I have a mind." End of chapter 2.